Well, here is the first step to potential Big Ten slash SEC college football domination. I guess you could say the first step was Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC, but nonetheless, you can see the SEC Big Ten unite to form an advisory group aimed at tackling issues amid changing landscape in college football. The two most powerful conferences are banding together to help chart the future of college sports. Well, isn't that just vague, right? An advisory board. Oh, we're just going to offer suggestions. We all know this is going to become a full-blown massive, separate exclusive league between the SEC and the Big Ten. This is really just the first step of it. And you're going to see the ACC, the Big 12, and what's ever left of the group of fives get squished like a bug. And this is why FSU so badly wants to join one of the power two. At the end of the day, this whole thing needs to be restructured. And I think by 2030, everything will be completely redone, because right now, conferences in college football just don't make sense. It is purely money driven. What's the point of a conference if you're facing teams from across the country? It makes no sense. The Big Ten and SEC announced Friday that they are banding together to form a joint advisory group with the goal of addressing the significant challenges facing college sports. The move comes as the NCAA struggles to govern intercollegiate athletics amid a sea of change that has imperiled the long-standing amateur model. The Big Ten and the SEC have substantial investment in the NCAA, and there is no question that the voices of our two conferences are integral to governance and other reform efforts. According to the Big Ten commissioner, we recognize the similarity in our circumstances as well as the urgency to address the common challenges we face. So that's just a bunch of boring talk. What's going on here is both of these conferences know they're so massive and so overwhelming over all the other conferences in college football. It would only make sense, because they share so much in common, to form some type, you really don't want to call it an alliance, because we've seen a lot of these alliances between two conferences fail. It's not even an alliance. They're not doing this to keep their leagues together. They're doing this because they're in such a different position than all the other conferences in college football that they would need to protect themselves. And obviously, with the 12-team playoff, we are expecting the 7-5 format, not the 6-6. I'm sure that's going to be announced soon. Friday's announcement clarified the body will have no authority to act independently, will only serve as a consulting body. But yeah, that's just the start of it. We all know the NCAA, they're completely powerless. There's no leader there. I'm guessing what we'll get eventually when it comes to these two conferences and whatever this is, there's going to be one commissioner that comes in. Unfortunately, when you get a commissioner, and certainly college football does need some type of power being a commissioner, normally the commissioner will work in what's best interest for a lot of these schools in terms of their money, and not necessarily what is best for the sport and the fans overall. I will say it is intriguing, the power struggle that we might witness between the NCAA and whatever this advisory board is in terms of their, I guess at this point, recommendations, because they're saying, no, we have no power right now. We're just going to kind of advise things, maybe give some recommendations to the NCAA on how to move forward. And then over time, I think you will see at this point, a lot of people think the NCAA is already run over. Even when they do their investigations, nobody takes them seriously. It seems like their relevance is waning, and maybe the last big thing the NCAA will do is possibly decide on a Michigan punishment. Now, whether or not that ends up being severe, we don't know. It's a very unique situation. And then it talks about the top challenges, and at this point, I think it is fair to say that college football is really a mess, because there is no leadership, there is no rules enforcement. We saw the NIL stuff get blatantly misused, the blatant illegal cheating in terms of recruiting, the manipulation with the extra pandemic year where players are playing 5, 6, sometimes even 7 seasons now in college football, and also these players are going to eventually have to become employees, and that's how they're going to get paid. But either way, this doesn't surprise me. The Big Ten and the SEC coming together, possibly a first step in a massive super league with the SEC and Big Ten at some point. I mean, with the 12-team playoff coming in and the 5-7 format where there's 5 auto bids and then 7 spots that will very likely go to mostly Big Ten and SEC teams, you could make the argument we don't need, some type of Super League where it's just the SEC and Big Ten because the playoff will make up most of those teams anyways. But you could also say, does the SEC and the Big Ten, with how powerful they are now and how many seismic mega teams they have with all the blue bloods, could they just completely break away and say, we're doing our own playoff? That's been kind of the theory that's been floated around. Either way, we'll have to continue to see how this develops. I do think Florida State will very soon, along with several other teams in the ACC, be leaving that conference. The ACC has already come out. They're pissed off at Florida State. Florida State is angry at them. They're trying to sue to get out of the conference. And now, this doesn't surprise me, Florida State is using the idea that they didn't want SMU and the 2 Pac-12 teams, Stanford and Cal, in the league. They're saying, oh, it's diluting our value. We didn't want that. The fact that that happened, that should be a way to where we could get out of this terrible TV deal. And this is mainly based off of TV deals. The SEC and the Big Ten both have similar TV deals. They'll both be going back to the negotiating table. I think one of them is going in 2030, another one in 2033. There's going to have to be some type of compromise with not just FSU, but possibly also Clemson, possibly also Miami, maybe North Carolina, maybe NC State, in terms of those teams banding together, agreeing to pay some sort of buyout to leave that horrible TV deal in the ACC. And that's why, again, I think the ACC added those 3 teams right before the start of the season last year, almost like it was rushed, because they knew the writing on the wall. They wanted to be proactive, unlike the Pac-12, when they could have gotten several teams from the Big 12 when the Big 12 was in an uneasy situation. The big bombshell came out a few years ago with Oklahoma and Texas leaving, and everyone thought the Big 12 would dissolve, but the Big 12 was able to stand pat, and it ends up being the Pac-12 because they were not proactive and did not go after Big 12 schools when they had the chance. So the ACC is doing that they've corrected, that horrible the mistake that the Pac-12 made, and they can stay together, even possibly losing 4 teams. But it's clear the 2 big dogs are going to be the SEC and the Big Ten. Now, how this all develops in terms of these teams creating their own Super League, having massive influence within NCAA and their policies, I'm guessing it's more so having the influence rather than actually creating their own Super League, at least for the time being. The big question is, do they both expand past 20 teams? Does the SEC get up to 20 teams? It certainly makes a lot of sense that both of these super leagues, mega conferences, whatever you want to call them, will be at 20 teams, and they'll both have very similar schedules. And then maybe they have 2 commissioners, Sankey and Patini, if they decide to do something like that. And this story just shows how ridiculous college football really is. So this was back in late August, right before the start of the 2021 season. ACC, Big Ten, and Pac-12 announce a conference alliance. I wonder how that alliance ended up. The ACC, I wouldn't say they're on the verge of collapse, but they're going to lose some teams. The Pac-12 doesn't exist anymore, and the Big Ten is an absolute mega giant. It just goes to show you how quickly things change in college football, and they're going to continue to change because right now this is not sustainable. With all of these teams, every year we're getting a new, blue blood team joining another league. This coming year, at least this summer, I would expect it to be FSU, possibly some other teams from the ACC, depending. They've already made it known they want out of that league. They don't have a good relationship with the ACC, and it is a terrible TV deal, and money will get them out of that league one way or another. They will try and use the courts. They will do whatever they can, and you can see the Big Ten and the SEC, the big dogs, and will have heavy influence with this advisory board coming out saying, oh, we're just going to advise, that's all. We don't have any real power, which is, of course, ridiculous. Why else would you be doing this? They want to influence the NCAA, and they think, based off of the positions that they're in, they're on a significantly different level than a conference, technically a Power 4 conference like the Big 12 or the ACC. They're on a different level than those two. That's why they're coming together, and they're making an alliance, and we're not seeing an alliance between the Big 10 and the Big 12, the SEC and the Big 12, It just doesn't make any sense. They're not on the same level. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But either way, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.